Get the indication from our director back here. Okay, we are ready to go. Thank you for your patience there to get started. Welcome, everybody. We want to go ahead and call the meeting to order and have a couple of recognitions as we get started. So our very own Officer Aquino, if you would like to, she asked for a second to talk to us. Nobody's under arrest, so.
What do we do? What do we do? Yeah.
You only get 3 minutes.
Okay, well, anyway, if you guys know, my name's Amy Aquino, and I've attended the meetings with you all here for some years, and I have really appreciated working here and working with you guys. I'm being promoted on Friday, so I'm gonna be out of this assignment, and it has been a wonderful assignment. I am really in awe of the work you guys do here because I was in Charlotte for the last one, and it was different. So the process, it's very good to see. So as a citizen, as well as an officer, we appreciate it. And I've really enjoyed working with you all. Thank you so much.
We're gonna miss you.
Congratulations on your promotion, Sergeant. Yeah.
She said it was effective Friday, so I couldn't say that. So I'm glad that council member did. So I'm going to recognize Councilmember Driggs. Do you have an adjustment to the agenda that you would like to talk about?
Yes, I would like to propose that we move agenda item 12 to, and Madam Chair, I was thinking we could move it to position 6 before the 15 or 20 minutes we're going to spend on congestion management.
Perfect.
If that's okay with you.
Perfect. So that we've got a motion on the floor to an adjustment to the agenda to move item 12 up to item 6. Mayor Becker's got a second. Any discussion on the motion? Is everybody okay with that? All those in favor say aye. Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Now we'll adopt. Do we need to adopt the agenda too? Or is that okay? Good. All right.
Yep.
Want to make sure procedurally we didn't mess up. Also want to recognize our very own Tony Lathrop, that is now the chair of the NCDOT board. So it's huge for us to have the chair on our board. Congratulations.
Pavement for everybody.
That's right. New roads everywhere. Great. We've got one person signed up for public comments. Mr. Carson Cohn, welcome. Good to see you again, sir.
You guys.
Come on up and got 3 minutes.
Okay, yes, ma'am. I'd like to also second what Miss Amy said about being in awe of what you guys do. I thank you for your dedication to this board, which seems to have such great impact and importance in our community. I do not believe that the work you all do typically receives instant gratification, and yet each of you consistently and nobly commit yourselves to the betterment of our infrastructure, which I appreciate. That appreciation, though, does not come without there being a desired goal. Soon, I don't know if it's at tonight's meeting, but the I-77 Express Lane, South Express Lane Working Group will make their recommendations known to the board. They will, according to my discussions with Ms. Carley of NCDOT, recommend a 10 use per month voucher for those who qualify for food stamps, who would apply. And they will have a requirement that at least $1 million per year be allocated for this. There is a similar program currently on I-77 North, but part of the recommendations that the Express Lane Working Group will be making is for this voucher program on 77 South to be more publicized. So while it hasn't been utilized to the $1 million that's going to be set aside for 77 South, it hasn't been publicized in the same way. So basically what my request is, I'm okay with, I know I said $35,000 pre-tax per year before, and I'm okay with that being adjusted to the food stamp qualification, which, yes, but I do request that the voucher be made to 62 uses per month, which is enough for someone to go to work and back every day of the month. And I also think that there's no reason why the voucher could not be verified by employers, why there couldn't be a verification set up for that. I do appreciate those of you who have given me feedback on this, and I would like, and I know my time's up to speak, but I would like to ask for what you guys' thoughts are on this subject, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohn. All right, well, moving through our agenda, ethics, awareness, and conflict interest reminder. Neil?
In accordance with the State Government Ethics Act, it is the duty of every board member to avoid conflict of interest. Does any board member have any known conflict of interest with respect to any of the matters coming before the board today? If so, please identify the conflict and refrain from any participation in the particular matter involved.
Any conflicts? Seeing none, hearing none. We'll move on to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? We've got a first and a second, Mayor Becker and Mr. Helms. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Motion carries. So our revised item number 6. At this point, we will have our presentation update from NCDOT on the 77 South Express Lanes Working Group. And Carly Swanson and there's Brett, okay, Brett Connect. Share with everybody what we've been up to this point and our next steps.
All right, we'll do that. Thank you. So again, everyone, I'm Brett Knipe. I'm with NCDOT, Division 10 Engineer, Carly Swanson with North Carolina Turnpike Authority, Director of Innovative Project Delivery. So we do want to give you guys an update tonight on our working group efforts. A lot of the folks in the room are part of that working group, so at least a good portion of you know a little bit about what we're going to cover tonight. But really, it's about developing some key contract terms that came out of the priorities that we heard loud and clear from everyone here and everyone in the working group. So that's what we want to cover. We'll go back and cover the project again, just do a quick overview. Where's the project in case we all forgot about where I-77 South is and what we've accomplished since October, since we've last talked about this, started the working group. Give you that working group update and talk about next steps. Carly's going to kind of pick up on the tail end of the presentation for us. So again, we're talking about the segment of I-77 from the center city of Charlotte at the Brookshire Freeway down to the South Carolina state line at State Project I-5718. This project is the same thing that we've been talking about really for years now and with you guys about how to tackle this, how to accomplish a project that's been submitted into the STIP by this group, and how do we deliver it. And so we went through that comparative analysis. Many of y'all probably remember that, where we were trying to determine how can we deliver the project. And out of that, we determined that a P3 delivery was really our only viable option with the project cost of $3.2 billion. And ultimately, you know, I think I've said it this way before in front of you guys, what the corridor really is a corridor that's challenged by congestion. There's many users of that corridor every single day. There are, you know, segments of the corridor that are well over 100,000 vehicles per day. And all that is ultimately leads to congestion. Congestion is directly related to crashes. And so there's more crashes on I-77 than your typical interstate urban corridor. It's about 2.5 times higher. Mecklenburg County also has the highest crash rates in the state, and it's all related to congestion. And so this doesn't just help solve a congestion issue, it helps solve a safety concern as well. So what we've been doing since October, since we formed the working group, we've kind of been running some parallel paths. We've got the NEPA process that I've talked to y'all about before, where we're developing a base design for the corridor, and that work has been ongoing. So we've been working closely with the Charlotte Department of Transportation, vetting those design concepts, and trying to find what we believe is the best solution, right? So that's going to feed a public a public meeting process that's going to begin this fall. But aside and above and beyond that, we've been engaging with community groups and local business groups. We've met with 15 of those groups so far. There's more on the books. I think we've got 2 that are going on this week, maybe 2 more next week. And so that momentum is just going to keep building. We've touched at least 350 people by doing that. And the idea is to make sure that we're going above and beyond to let folks know that this project is here, this project is coming, and that this fall, we're going to have public meetings where folks really get to see what does this project look like. Also, Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program that NCDOT is really proud of. That's something that it's a requirement of all of our projects essentially to have a DBE component. So what we do to promote that is about every 6 months, we'll host a DBE event where we advertise this event. It's held on a Saturday. We bring in all of our key staff that can talk through how to do business at NCDOT, how to get involved. And that was something that we heard from many of the folks we met with, many of the folks on the working group as well. So we highlighted the I-77 project at our last DBE event in March and had a really good turnout. We've been working with FHWA, met with FHWA, went over the whole project, tried to define those key touch points where we need FHWA's approval and input, trying to make sure that we're getting ahead of all the problems that we can see, at least, to make sure we can deliver this project successfully when that time comes. So, but the working group itself, we've held 4 meetings. We held our 4th meeting today. We provided an update to the working group with the progress we've made with refining these key contract terms. We're going to get you guys more information on that. I think Carly might talk a little bit about that, but in order to make sure that we're learning from other people's experiences, we compared ourselves to 8 other contracts in other states, other P3 contracts with express lanes. We've talked to Virginia Department of Transportation. We've talked to the Texas Department of Transportation, both of which have experience with express lane projects delivered in this manner. And we've had 22 meetings with interested parties, concessionaire teams that would bid on this project. And there is a lot of interest from that market group. And we're pretty confident there's going to be a very competitive process because that's playing out in Tennessee with the projects they're bidding, and it's also playing out in the state of Georgia, the projects they're bidding out. So very confident that we're going to have a lot of folks interested in this project. So I'll turn it over to Carly to talk to you guys a little bit more detail about the working group progress.
Good evening, members of the board. As Brett said, I'm Carly Swanson from NCDOT. Appreciate the opportunity to give an update on the working group. Before I begin, I did want to thank Chair Qualls and the 11 working group members from the board who participated in this process over the last 6 months. It's been a lot of work, but we appreciate the involvement and the collaboration through this process. So first, just to give a brief overview of the working group, back last October, this board did request NCDOT to move forward with the P3 delivery process for the I-77 South Express lanes. As part of that, we did create this working group made up of 12 of the CRTPO board members in partnership with NCDOT to develop from priorities that have been identified, project objectives and priorities that would inform indicative terms. So the bullets you see here, those were all identified in our presentation and our meetings with you all over the course of the last couple of years, as well as our meetings with the working group. But a few points I did want to point out in terms of priorities that were identified: optimizing the utilization of express lanes and the general purpose lanes, encouraging a competitive procurement process, as Brett mentioned earlier, to receive multiple fixed price bids, increasing transparency of the business during all phases of the project, as well as providing benefits to transit. And there's a timeline here at the bottom. The stars do represent the working group meetings. We first started with defining objectives and key terms. And then in January, we drafted the key terms to share with the working group. Throughout this process, we did engage the market, as Brett mentioned, engaging developers to get feedback on the terms that we have been drafting along the way. And during this afternoon's meeting, we were able to finalize those key terms. So the plan is to share those key terms with you all for review in early June. That will start the 60-day review period. And then we are still on schedule to advertise RFQ in August. Now you'll see the star there in mid-June. We have a date set June 18th, and we will share more information with you all. But our NCDOT staff will be available to answer any questions that you all may have before the full CRTPO board meeting in June. All right, and this is a slide that we presented each working group meeting, just to remind everybody on what the approach is and why we are working together in this process. So the working group brings together NCDOT and CRTPO in a collaborative effort to establish clear project objectives and priorities that will shape key commercial and competitive terms for I-77 South. And then we've also shown this slide every presentation we've given through the working group. As we presented in the past to you all, we are working with $600 million in state funding. So for us, as we identified the priorities, we had to balance that with the working group to make sure that the project's financial viability pencils out. We also want to ensure that we have competition. So as we are looking at all these priorities, that's why it was so important for us to get feedback from the working group and then take those to developers to get their feedback as well. And this really talks through the iterative process. So the working group, partnership between NCDOT and CRTPO, but we know that competition is a priority for you all with this process. So ensuring that we are taking the draft key terms to the market was important as well. As Brett mentioned, we had 22 meetings with different companies interested in the project along the way. But first, before we started those meetings, we defined the priorities from the working group, then identified the key impacted terms, and then we developed the key terms for review. We took those to the market to evaluate the impact of competition and evaluate any customer operational implications. And then as we get towards the end today, we were able to look at the final key terms and finalize those so they're ready for your review in June. And as we walked through the priorities, we did categorize those into two main groups. They were based on the financial implications of the key terms. So first, the low financial impact. Those are priorities that are simple to address and can be incorporated with minimal complexity. So an example of that is allowing transit vehicles to use the express lanes toll-free. That was a key term. That was a priority that was identified early in the process, and it's also something that is allowed on I-77 North. The next category included high financial impact priorities. So those are complex issues with more significant financial implications that required prioritization. If you'll remember from the balance beam slide, we have $600 million in state funding to work with. We had to make sure as a group that we were prioritizing these and that we were within our budget. So an example of a high financial impact priority is implementing toll rate caps to increase utilization of the express lanes. We know that we have heard you loud and clear over the last couple of years that toll rates you feel are too high on I-77 North and the express lanes are not being utilized. Toll caps are not on I-77 North, so this is something that is different that we would be implementing on South to help both keep the toll rates down, but also ensure that the express lanes are being utilized, which also helps the general purpose lanes. So next steps in the indicative procurement schedule. So the working group, as I've said, will provide the final key terms to the full CRTPO board 60 days in advance of the public advertisement. After our meeting today, we plan on sharing those terms with you all on email in early June. As mentioned earlier, we also plan on having that office hour session to answer any questions or receive feedback. In addition, Brett and I will also be available at any time to help answer any questions that you may have on the terms that we share with you. So after the RFQ would be advertised later this year, the statement of qualifications would be due. As we look into first quarter of 2026, the shortlisted bidders would be selected. Also, we would issue the draft RFP and then the final RFP early 2027 with commercial close in second quarter of 2027. And here I did want to point out, we do have a project website. Over the course of the last 4 working group meetings, we have posted meeting presentations and materials on our website. So for those of you who would like to go back and look at what was covered in those meetings, we do have those listed. And Also, you can log on to ncdot.gov and search I-77 South, and the project page will come up that way. But as mentioned, Brett and I are available. Our contact information is here if you have any questions as you do walk through those terms. And with that, we'll take any questions you may have.
So just for clarification for everybody, you're going to send out the draft terms the 1st of June to everybody here on the board. We'll have an hour prior to our next meeting that we'll call office hours, or at any time can reach out to you all. So we want that hour before for any, finite questions that you may have prior to that presentation to the whole boards. And then at that point, it will be another 60 days that we'll receive some feedback. And if the working group needs to come back together to really, wrestle with anything that comes up, we'll certainly leaving those options open. But our thoughts are that we want the information out there, poke holes in it, ask questions, and, get the answers that you need, and that then they'll be ready to release everything to the public in August for the RFQ, right?
Yes.
Make sure I said that correctly. Perfect. Any questions or comments for Carly or Brett at this time? Let's start up here. Mayor Hickton?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. The first is, will this board have any say on who the vendor chosen is?
Vendor.
Do we have any?
So, that's not the intent. I mean, the intent was to work with you guys well in advance, which we believe we've done and we want to continue to do. And that's the whole point of the developing these key contract terms, right? Is to ensure that we've got your priorities. We've heard you. We've vetted all that through the market, and we've developed what we believe is a much better project that will be in front of us compared to what you guys are comparing it to on the north. So, the intent would be for us to follow our typical processes, which would be to, shortlist groups and then pick and award the final contractor based on all those priorities and all those key terms and who has the best proposal to address those key terms.
Are you required to take the lowest responsible bid, or you can?
It's really more of a qualifications-based bid, right?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I have a question for our new NCDOT chair, Mr. Lathrop. Is there any effort of the board to advocate for making the $600 million cap, making that greater?
Not that I know of right now, no. We did that, we would do it consistent with, in collaboration with the department and the governor. Well, but no, I'm not aware of it.
Thank you.
Great questions.
Always looking for more money.
Yeah. Ron?
Thank you. So I'm not sure exactly who to direct this to, maybe Brett, maybe our staff. But I just had a question about TCC's involvement with this.
Yeah.
Is the TCC involved at all, and are they receiving regular updates on this project?
So we're going to be going to the TCC next week, and we're planning on kind of giving them the same update that you guys are getting tonight. So we are going to be meeting with them.
Thank you. And one other question, and maybe this was just a timing thing, I don't know, but I noticed that, there was really a lack of information in our agenda packet on this item. Was there a reason, why we didn't have more information presented to us in our agenda packet to review?
I think it was this was just bringing the update. We hadn't had an update for a couple of months of the working group.
Okay, thank you.
But
Other
Commissioner
questions? I
Helms,
guess another.
well, I am happy to, if you want to meet and talk and look through any of it, if that'll help, to get you a little, if you feel more up to speed about it, we can sit down and talk if you'd like.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate that, and I'll be glad to reach out if I have any questions. Thank you.
I just want to say that thank NCDOT. It's been a long road just to get to this point, but especially thank to Citizen Carson Cone for your involvement and your feedback. I think it's very important when citizens speak up. So I greatly appreciate that.
Other questions? Am I missing anybody? Any comments from any of the working group members? Councilmember Driggs, you want to offer anything? Sorry, put you on the
So,
spot.
yeah, I appreciate it. I just want to say, I think the work of the working group was impressive. Most of you here are actually members, so you can disagree if you want. But for the benefit of those who weren't members, we went into a huge amount of detail. We went back and forth on a lot of the issues. And I think everything that came out in meetings of this full group was vetted thoroughly in the working group. The issues of optimizing utilization, the issues of competitiveness, of expansion, all of those topics. So if you look in detail at the major and minor impact issues that were alluded to before, you'll see that I believe everything anybody brought up is reflected there. So I'm pleased with it. We did agree as a working group that for now our work is done. So there's nothing ongoing anymore in the working group. We are going to deliver this to the full board, and then we will reconvene if the reaction from the full board warrants further discussion to go deeper into whatever issues may come up. But again, our hope is to be able to adhere to the timeline that was just described in order to get the ball in motion.
Amelia, have anything you want to offer? Just
Say that we spent a lot of time working on things, terms in the contract that would make it different from things we've seen in the past to address issues of equity, to address issues of fairness. And I have been impressed that all of our concerns were addressed along the way. I still, await, as everyone, the final product. But I have been really pleased with the process.
anyone else? Mayor Knox, surely you have something. right?
I do. I think having the time to devote separately from this chamber, with a lot of the same people that sit at this board and ask questions that are a lot of times bogged down in redundancy, in a larger theater. I think checking those boxes and bringing what will be the ideas that are presented to you in the future will be advantageous for this larger board and carving the path that we choose to go down.
Right. I think we've all can agree that this is certainly unprecedented. Is that probably right from the DOT perspective for the a working group and for the MPO board to be this involved in being able to really hear that. So thank you to the entire team, because you guys had rolled in deep with a lot of expertise, and every time that there was something thrown at you, you spent the time to research and go to bat for what you heard. And again, hopefully this will be a model for maybe projects going forward throughout the state that that will be more of a collaborative process as opposed to, yep, let us take it and run with it now that you've said that. So we appreciated it. So Mayor Murray, do you have anything you want to say? You sat on the committee as well.
Yeah, I can just say, extend my appreciation for the existence of the committee and the opportunity for the committee to speak. And I think I'll commend the DOT staff, both of you, Brett, Carly, for everything the committee asked for was just like, okay. And to see these terms that have been put together and to see how they're all integrated in there now. We were reviewing some of them tonight and some of them last month or the month before. To see them actually in there and to know that that's what they will be bidding on is really encouraging, and it's nice to see. I realized DOT or 77 North was a pretty low bar to be better than, but it seems pretty clear that what we've come up with is a lot better. I was thinking of mentioning this when we talk about this further on, maybe next month, but I'll say it now. When I first learned of this project in my first few meetings here, the big concern was, well, what lessons learned is there from I-77 North that we can apply to this project? And the fact that this committee was formed, to me, just screams that we're looking to apply those lessons learned. And everybody here brought that perspective to these meetings, to the input of those meetings. So I think it's safe to say that we have successfully applied our lessons learned and come up with some pretty good terms, I think. So.
Super. Okay. Yes.
And thank you for your comments. For those of us who live through I-77 North, there were a lot of lessons learned. And fortunately, this committee gave us the opportunity to discuss them, learn from the ones that are positive, and also try not to repeat the ones that are bad. And we know the things that are failing there, the things that we'd like to see improved. Hopefully, as we move forward with this model, not just in our area, but across our entire state, it can start to set the model for how we do improvements, transportation everywhere. And this is going to be a model that we're going to have to employ more just because of the things that Tony was just talking about. We need more money, right? So this is something that we're going to see. Hopefully, we'll continue to get better and better at this, but these working groups certainly offer the opportunity to do so. I appreciate the opportunity for me to sit on this as just someone sitting here as a Turnpike Authority non-voting member. But I think it's important to have us represented there, just like we need to have NCDOT represented there, like Stephen was doing. So thank you for that opportunity.
All right. So, echoing all the appreciation for the working group members, it was a lot of extra time. I know everybody has a regular job for the most part, and you took time out to spend the extra hours, the extra time, and brought forth the voice of this entire board. So I look forward to the presentation next month and all the details again. Mark your calendars now. If you're going to come an hour early for the conversation open office hours, it'll be right across the hall, and the welcome that conversation. So with that, we will let you all have the rest of your evening and safely drive back to your respective areas that are a little bit longer distance, that are not a managed lane. Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, we'll move on to our education session. It's our third and final session of the congestion management. Gosh, it's been a long day. Welcome. Good to see you
Thank
again.
you. Yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm John Muth with the consulting firm VHB. I manage our Charlotte office. And also with me tonight are my colleagues, Dave Mulholland and Craig Schneider. And we're here to deliver the third workshop in this congestion management series. So with that, I think we're going to lead off with Dave and then Craig, and then I'll finish up.
Thank you, John, for the introduction, and thank you to the board for allowing us to come do the third and final education series on this. As a recap, we had session one, which we really started to lay the framework for the congestion management. Session two was getting a little bit more into the technical. We got some great feedback. You're going to hear about how we reacted and included some of your comments and feedback into the presentation tonight. And then tonight, really trying to close it out by talking about some of the congestion, identified the top 15 facilities, some of the mitigative strategies, and some of the funding opportunities that are out there. So as I mentioned, the section one, when we talked about the introduction, we really did the definition and tried to get into the core of what it is. Hearing some of the questions that came out from some of the commissioners, it was really a key area of trying to get to the definition. What is the federal highway definition of congestion in itself? We got into some of the preliminary rankings, and then session two really dove deeper into the tools to measure congestion, got into some of the prioritization, talked about the reoccurring and non-reoccurring being incidents and so forth, but also looking at the congestion impacts on that. One of the areas that became pretty clear when we actually started talking about the definition, what is congestion, is Federal Highway's definition of what congestion is. So as it relates to excess vehicles on a portion of roadway during any given time or any particular time, oftentimes the normal definition of congestion is tied to free flow speeds. It's tied to when it's stop and go traffic. There's a lot of questions in the definition of congestion around if it's a interstate or if it's a local roadway. You can actually have a local roadway, and sometimes it may have more definition of congestion because it doesn't take into account the number of vehicles on it. It just takes into account that vehicles are stopped. So we went ahead and tried to address that by breaking into groups and categories that Craig will talk about later, showing some of the freeway type facilities and then some of the local facilities, just to actually separate those, because I know that created some questions last time when we were presenting in front of the board. So today we're going to focus on what are the top congested facilities in the CRTPO region? Again, breaking out, looking at the different areas. We're going to talk about some of the active projects because last time we had some projects that actually had programs on it, i.e. the 77 express lanes that you just heard about a couple minutes ago. And then we're going to talk about some of the potential mitigative strategies that are afforded to each one of the strategies that are up there, but also talk about maybe some of the funding opportunities that are available to you, and that's going to be what John's going to be talking about. So I'm going to pass it over to Craig that's going to get into the bulk of the tools and the context of this.
So we wanted to lean into, like we discussed last time, the travel time index, which is really looking at the congestion and what you guys see over that free flow speed. So that's really leaning into, you know, how much that the segments are congested and how much they're being occupied. On the previous slide that you saw that Dave showed, number 1 and 2 that were just talked about NCDOT for I-77 appeared. And so like that's where we wanted to make sure we took time and reviewed the different projects, but also looked at the different congestion factors. So based on that travel time index, we basically group different segments together to make sure we're looking at them holistically, seeing the same trend, but then also looked into congestion percentage and some of the other metrics you see here on the slide based on the feedback you provided from the first workshop. So with that TTI that you guys are seeing and hearing so much about really is in alignment with what you guys have previously done back in 2018. So when you guys look at the image here on the left, this is what RS&H did back in 2018, looking at big data analytics from HERE data. It's similar to what we're doing today with these workshops. So what you see on the right with the 2 circles is basically our TTI. The numbers and colors have changed. You know, the higher you are over 1, the more congested you are. And so you'll see the areas there are a little bit more eye-catching, but there's a little more blue than what you see from what they previously had there with RS&H. And that's just because they were using a smaller band going to 1.5. We saw with using INRIX probe data, which is another form of big data, we're seeing a little bit more higher congestion, and it really appears along that I-77 corridor, as well as some areas on the outskirts around the circle of Charlotte. So we expanded that out and basically identified a top 50 corridor with you guys. With those, the top 15 were presented. And so what you see here on the left from the workshop 1 is basically your thoughts of what those congested corridors and segments would look like. And the bolded ones you see here with the limits in the corridors are what we presented to you previously. So there were some questions about, you know, why are some of these smaller roads popping up? And as Dave alluded to, you know, it really has to do with that TTI metric. It's also baked into how you guys do your planning and prioritization. And so what we did was we went back and looked at these, and we looked at it from basically different roadway classifications. So we took that top 50 of those congestion segments, we compared it to active projects, right? Is it an NCDOT STIP? Is there an HSIP or spot program funding allocated for it? CRTPO identified it. And basically the ones that overlapped, we dropped them out because they're currently being addressed. We wanted to really focus on the ones that didn't have projects, things that could have, you know, future funding allocation for it, but also future program and improvements that could be used to make your purview better for the constituents. So with that, we really leaned into the mobility versus access, model there with the functional classification, really trying to prioritize the different roadways so that we're really identifying strategies for the different types. So interstates and principal arterials were elevated because they have more amount of vehicles that go through it. And that's why you're going to see a revised list today on this next slide. The second half here, we kind of removed it. The NC MINS that it was previously used in the past hasn't really been used anymore. So we're really just leaning into roadway classification. So with that revised list, you'll see the band. You guys have basically 5 intersection segments there on interstates that were appearing for mitigated strategies, as well as principal arterials for rounding out your top 15. And what we wanted to do was take the time to focus on these areas as they appear around the CRTPO region and identify strategies on how you could better figure out to what you can use, whether it be your CRPTO strategies that you guys have identified or FHWA's toolbox of mitigation strategies for congestion. John?
Thanks, Craig. So this slide shows several of the potential mitigation strategies that can be used that are in that toolbox that Craig mentioned. And, most all of these are things that, this board has seen and heard and implemented around the region. So if, the TDM study, Central and Regional Council recently led the development of your regional TDM plan. You know, the HOV, HOT lanes, again, you heard from Carly and Brett, how that's one of your options that you're considering for I-77 South. And then the TSMO, or Transportation System Management. So on an interstate, that could look like ramp metering or variable speed limits, depending on the time of day. And if, as you're trying to maybe get the platoons of vehicles to kind of, you know, bunch up more and be more in a typical maybe 10-mile range of speed limits, so it's safer and you can get higher capacity. And then also ideas like using the shoulders on the interstate, possibly for transit vehicles. And again, if the speeds on the interstate on the main line are slow during the peak hours of congestion, then it can be you know, a safe option maybe to have transit vehicles operate on that shoulder. And then of course additional lanes and roadway widening, and you know, those can be pretty expensive. So this is the some of the principal arterials, if you will, and you can see on the map, on the lower map, they're kind of all, they ring kind of the west and south and east side of town out around I-485. So whether it's because I-485 is delivering a lot of vehicles to those areas, and then as they exit the interstate, they become congested. And then also the upper map shows one up at Bagnell Boulevard up near Statesville. So again, these were kind of the ones where the, again, the principal arterials. So some of the mitigative strategies for principal arterials, again, kind of some of the same families in the toolbox there with TDM. Again, you could have van pooling, access management program. And then as you, again, the TSMO mitigation strategies for principal arterials could be more like reversible lanes. You know, you've seen that we have those on Tyvola, 7th Street areas where the flow is kind of one way in the morning and the other way in the evening. So you can do reversible lanes and optimization of signal timing, turn lane restrictions. We've all seen those implemented around the area. And then again, promoting alternative modes like transit. And you heard Carly and Brett again talk about one of the ideas or conditions maybe for the I-77 South as the transit vehicles could use the HOV, HOT lane at no cost. So again, you have a regional TDM plan, the state's updated its ITS plan. So when it comes to strategies and everything, I think, you know, you're fortunate you stayed up to date. So again, funding opportunities, of course, the STIP, you know, and that's what you talk about when you're prioritizing all the projects and trying to get those funded. There's also other types of funding which are much more competitive, you know, more folks going after them, not as much funding available. So kind of the build grants and some of these discretionary grants aren't going to be solutions that necessarily solve, you know, your major congestion issues for the area. And with that, we'd be happy to take any questions or listen to conversation and talk about next steps.
Mayor Hickton?
Yeah, I just noticed that one of the congested areas on 45 that was noted was I-74 to John Street. That's, they're side by side. Is that even, I don't think they're even a mile apart. Is that, you're just saying that very small section?
Yep. Yeah, so it's that small section that you mentioned there with John Street. In the beginning, it's one of the ramps that's coming off on number 17. It's basically number 28. So it's as you get off the interchange and getting onto the ramp there. So that's where the ramp metering strategy could basically have some impact for you all.
Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions, comments?
Yeah, small comment. How often do we look at light metering to try and control flow? And I say this in reference to really to 521 north, that Marvin to 485. Is that an area that'd be perhaps a good candidate for tinkering with the lights and playing with the lights to keep the flow going?
Yeah, so when you're looking at that, that's more of a principal arterial strategy, basically signal timing and operation. You really want to look at your corridors in particular, making sure you're getting that progression that you're looking for. That's also why intersection improvements was listed there at the bottom. Sometimes, you know, you can't do intersection widening, but there can be, you know, timings or coordinated cycles that could better help with the main platooning.
Yeah.
That's something that NCDOT typically addresses as well.
because I think that particular corridor could benefit greatly. There are a few examples just in the city of San Francisco
Yep.
where the lights are timed. So if you're going the speed limit, you will make the light
Correct.
and you will move continually. So I think that that's something we'll look at throughout, maybe.
Yeah, and free flow conditions in particular, you'll make that light, right? It's basically the congestion, can you allocate more to the main line? And so ATSPM is another strategy that's been provided, trying to basically balance a little bit more with more traffic loops in the pavement so that they can do a little bit more predictive measures to help that platooning based upon volume.
Other questions, comments? All right. Thank you. Thank
You
you for all
guys.
the information and in each one of the sessions, I think we've all learned a little something, a little nugget from each one of them.
Thank you.
Moving on, our next agenda item, the presentation from the Association of MPOs, it's called AMPO update. And Brian, are you gonna introduce our guest?
Yeah, I can do that. So joining us this evening is Bill Kirus. He is the executive director of AMPO. And you can see him up in the little corner there. And I will be advancing the slides for him. And yeah, looking forward to this.
All right. Welcome, Bill. Glad to have you.
Thank you, Chair Qualls, and thank you to members of the board. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you all this morning, or excuse me, the afternoon. It has been a long day, as was stated earlier. So I just also wanted to thank the members of the board for their leadership and engagement in serving the MPO and all the great work that you do. It truly is inspiring, and we heard that earlier in the program. And so just wanted to commend you for all of your work in your roles and thank you. And certainly wanted to do the same for Bob and his team as staff at the MPO. We greatly appreciate their support of AMPO as an organization, and CRTPO is well represented within our organization, with Brian serving on our technical committee. So just I wanted to thank Brian and Bob and the whole team at CRTPO. So in terms of my presentation, I'm going to start with a little bit about who we are, what we do, some of the services that we provide for MPOs across the country. And then I'll shift into the state of play, if you will, in Washington, D.C., and then focus in a little bit more on reauthorization of the Surface Transportation Bill, which is certainly in full swing at the moment, and speak to some of the legislative priorities that we are advocating for on behalf of our members and the MPOs. Next slide. So there are 410 MPOs across the US as of the 2020 census. We do our best to represent all 410, which is no easy task, given that they range in size and certainly challenges, if you will. Everything from one staff person running the entire MPO all the way to 400 plus staff running an MPO. So lots of diversity in terms of resources and issues that they are all dealing with in their regions. We are a membership organization, and we have over 2/3 of the 410 MPOs as members of AMPO. So we pride ourselves in our network. Our strength is our network, and we also pride ourselves in being a member-led and member-driven organization. Next slide. So like I said, everything starts at the center with our members and goes out from there. We are structured somewhat similarly to an MPO. We have our board of directors, and underneath that, a technical committee and a policy committee, and then ad hoc committees sort of as needed. And then under there, we have what we call interest groups, and they are sort of subject matter expert groups where MPO staff are able to come together on these particular topics and share experiences and best practices and things like this. We have a number of other ways to get involved, and I'll get to that in just a little bit. Next slide. So just a little bit more detail on those groups. We have 8 of them, and you can see here the topics that they currently focus on. And we tend to sort of sunset those and stand up new ones just based on the needs of the MPOs across the country. And so these are sort of the most active at the moment based on what we're hearing from our membership. And we revisit that on an annual basis just to make sure that is what is top of mind for folks. And we are able to provide a number of professional credits as a part of those meetings, and a number of professional credits for all of our in-person events as well to help you keep up with those certifications. And then, as I mentioned, we have our policy committee and technical committee, which Brian sits on the technical committee, and a number of other sort of ad hoc groups and forums, again, sort of based on what we're hearing from members as what's needed. Next slide. We provide a number of resources. So listed here, the National Beat is our weekly newsletter that sort of captures and curates, what is pertinent to the MPOs that's coming out of Washington. And we also have a more general biweekly newsletter that sort of just captures what's going on across the community. And then a new resource that we set up in January is the Friday docket, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but that speaks to curating and tracking all of the litigation and sort of what's going on in the courts over the last couple of months and how that may or may not impact the MPO community. We also have a notice of funding opportunity tracker, NOFO tracker, that tracks all of the different discretionary opportunities that are out there. And now the current administration is starting to put out some revised NOFOs based on their priorities. And so we are updating our tracker with all of that as that happens in real time. And in fact, in this week's National Beat, we received some additional insight as to what a strong application might look like for the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. And so we'll be sharing that later this week. And then we do a significant policy analysis and have built what we refer to as the Congressional Compass, which is a interactive online tool. Next slide. So AMPO is a 501c4. We also have a 501c3, the AMPO Research Foundation. And we have a number of programs and resources coming out of that. State of the practice reports, extensive survey work that we do just to make sure, again, we understand what the latest and greatest is with the MPOs across the country, and some educational programs, which I'll speak to next. Next slide. So we're really proud. We recently stood up last summer, in fact, the MPO Institute. So we've got a handful of courses in there, and this is a online learning platform where we have built all of the content. Currently, we have in there an MPO 101 and a federal funding 101. And it's a learn as you learn at your leisure. You can pause at any time and get right back into it at any time. And then at the end, you'll receive a certificate from AMPO acknowledging that you took the training. We are currently building additional courses. We hope to be adding 2 more by the end of the calendar year is the goal. And NCDOT actually purchased a subscription to this for the state and made some seats available for the MPOs across the state. And we've confirmed with them that they plan to re-up that subscription for the next fiscal year. So we're excited to push out some new content through them and in coordination with the MPOs. Next slide. So we have 2 big in-person events. One is every other year, and the other is our big annual conference, which happens in the fall. This year we will be in Providence, Rhode Island in the middle of September, and our training symposium will be in April, I believe, in Lexington, Kentucky. So stay tuned and certainly encourage participation in both of those events. Next slide. So another service that we provide is really bringing the message and telling the story on behalf of our members. And so, really hearing from the MPOs on the ground, what's working, what's not working, and then bringing that back to either USDOT or Congress and trying to sort of figure out some solutions if there's challenges, or just elevating the value and the role of the MPO as an entity and sort of everything that they do on behalf of their communities with regard to infrastructure and transportation and mobility. Next slide. So shifting into the current state of the play, I'll kind of cover a little bit about the administration, what's going on in Congress, and then again, the courts. One thing I'll flag with staffing as the current administration continues to reshape the federal government, that is certainly holding true at USDOT. And to date, we know that a number of division offices within each state has seen significant reductions in staff. And That also holds true at USDOT headquarters in Washington, D.C. And so we're sort of navigating what that is going to look like as we are in and continue. We'll sort of enter into full-on construction season in terms of getting project approvals and NEPA and sign off and things like this. So really hoping that we can mitigate any potential delays due to the reductions in staff. But it's something we're actively working with USDOT on. Next slide. So staying on the administration, they also had provided a list of rescissions to Congress to be considered in the reconciliation bills that are being negotiated as we speak. Fortunately for MPOs, they were not allowed to rescind anything related to the IIJA, which is funding all of our programs and projects. They did recommend rescinding some things in the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. Some things that I think our members were concerned about were some of the EV tax breaks, and then a program called the Neighborhood Access and Equity Program. There were a number of MPOs that had been awarded funding under that program, and what we're hearing is that may go away. So we're tracking that, and we'll keep everybody updated. But largely, the rescissions that were recommended won't have a significant impact on the MPO community as we understand it. The executive orders continue to sort of reshape federal agencies and policies with a focus on removing things related to DEI, climate, et cetera. Next slide. So as I had mentioned, there's certainly a lot of activity in the courts related to these executive orders. And so we have built the AMPO litigation tracker and created a newsletter, which we've referred to as the Friday docket to go along with it. It goes out every Friday afternoon. And all of that is housed in a cloud-based, publicly accessible platform, which is linked right there. And I believe these slides will be shared after the fact. And if there's folks that are interested in signing up for any of what I'm covering here today, please feel free to reach out and we can get you signed up. Next slide. So at USDOT, Secretary Duffy has identified 4 priorities that he is looking to advance through all of USDOT's funding and programming. That is safety, innovation, turning dirt, streamlining projects, getting things built, if you will, and families. So as I had mentioned, we were able to get some clarity from Secretary Duffy's team on what that means for how to build that into your application for the grant opportunities that are out there, specifically for SS4A. And so we were able to get some insight there that we'll be sharing as a part of this week's newsletter, and we'll get that out to folks. Next slide. So as I mentioned, Congress is currently negotiating reconciliation. The continuing resolution was passed a couple months ago, and that funds everything through September 30th of this year. The goal is for them to get reconciliation through, and then they will shift their attention to FY26 funding bills. So remains to be seen on timing there, but they have set sort of an aggressive legislative agenda to get that done before September 30th of this year. And they have begun, and within the next month or so, we're going to sit down and begin writing the next surface transportation bill to replace the IIJA. What we're hearing in terms of priorities and focus is flexibility and control to state DOTs and to regions, permitting reforms and streamlining. There's a focus on planning and performance measures, and certainly safety and technology and innovation as well. There's been some discussion that transit and rail programs may be looked at for potential targets for cuts. And we'll keep everybody posted as to what that might look like. But nonetheless, it's as I had mentioned earlier, incredibly important that as members of Congress are having these conversations, that we continue to elevate and amplify the value of the MPOs as entities across the country. Next slide. So just a quick refresher on reauthorization. It is the primary piece of legislation that funds MPOs and programs and projects. It occurs every 5 to 6 years, with the current piece of legislation expiring in September 30th of 2026. And it is funding that is guaranteed coming through the Highway Trust Fund. You can see here the primary authorizing committees that will write different pieces of the bill. Senate EPW, Environment and Public Works, really writes the bulk of the bill. And so we have been working incredibly closely with the staff there to really ensure that MPOs are well represented in these conversations. Next slide. In terms of timing, they have set an aggressive schedule for themselves. The goal is to potentially have a draft bill by late summer, early fall. I'd probably take the over on that one, but crazier things have happened, so we'll see. Nonetheless, they are going to be drafting and writing legislative language over the summer. And at whatever point a bill gets to the floor and is passed, whether that's on an aggressive timeline or it gets delayed a little bit, the language that they write this summer will be included. And so it's really important that we are right at the center of that conversation, which we're ensuring that we are. And so we'll see how the next couple of months go. And we may or may not see an extension come next September, but they're actively working on that right now and trying to remain aggressive. So we will see, and we'll keep everybody posted. Next slide. So AMPO has been engaging with our membership over the last, I'd say, 2+ years, really trying to identify again what was working, what wasn't working, working through that in real time, but also thinking about what it meant for reauthorization. And after extensive survey work, conversations, case studies, etc., we landed on these top 5 priorities, and that is just increasing overall planning funds, and making sure that even the smaller MPOs are receiving enough to be well enough resourced to do their job and meet the needs of their communities. Shifting some of the discretionary funding to formula funding, things like SS4A, safety is always a top priority, and so why should we have to compete for it? We should all be getting some of that funding to improve safety in our communities, and looking to maintain the fact that it goes directly to the MPOs to administer. Reducing the local match, that 20%, we've heard loud and clear, it is oftentimes hard to come up with, whether it's for the planning funds or for capital projects. And so we are advocating for reducing that 20% for programs. And then allowing the flexibility of carrying funds over from year to year. Some states allow that, some states don't. And so it's something that we'd like to just standardize and allow for everybody to do to better utilize the funds. And then, as I mentioned, the NPO is becoming direct recipients for even some of the formula funds. Should that be something that the MPO would like to do? We're advocating for an opt-out provision. So if you have a process that's working really well, or you feel you can't administer federal funds directly, that's perfectly fine, and we'll have a way to address that. Next slide. So just again, in terms of how we're asking for it, we sort of view this as one ask of, increase the PL, eliminate the match for PL in particular, make it 100% federal, send it directly to the MPOs, and then allow for some flexibility there to save up some of those funds over a period of time. Next slide. Sorry, back one. Thanks. I also wanted to flag the LOT Coalition. The acronym stands for Local Officials in Transportation. And so as you can see here, it is these groups, and we have been working hand in hand with them over the last year plus to make sure that what we all respectively advocating for works well for our organizations. And we actually came together and as a group put together our own set of priorities. And they have been shared publicly across our organizations and certainly with Congress as well as we move through reauthorization. So really excited about the work and coordination amongst these national groups. I'd say it's probably the strongest that it's been, at least since I've been at AMPO. And so that's a really positive thing. Next slide. We've also built this engagement toolkit packed with all kinds of information and messaging tools as to how to have these conversations with your congressional delegation. As I mentioned, it is critical that we really elevate the role and the value and the worth of the MPO as we're moving through this reauthorization process. And so we are encouraging, to the extent that you're able to and willing, to use some of these materials and initiate or continue the conversation with your congressional delegation. Next slide. So with that, happy to take any questions or expand on anything I covered or didn't cover.
All right, thanks, Bill. Questions? Councilmember Driggs?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. As they go to reauthorize, what are we expecting in terms of the availability of federal funds for projects? I mean, we've come off the infrastructure bill, or we're going to. Is there a guess as to, in the aggregate, what kind of money is going to be there?
Yeah, so that's the big outstanding question. Nobody has sort of set a top line or a baseline as to what that number is. The IIJA was unique in that for the first time it had the advanced appropriations, and so that guaranteed that money over the life of the bill. And so there's a sort of a school of thought that should just now be the process going forward, and that is the new baseline. And then there are others, Chair Graves of the House T&I Committee has said that the baseline is going to be just the formula dollars without that extra pot of money. And so, we'll have to see where it lands. Perhaps it's somewhere in the middle. But it's still one of those question marks that's out there in terms of what that baseline is going to be.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No questions? All right. Thank you for bringing us up to speed. I think this is a great update. Perhaps we need to have you about every 6 months of what's happening up there for your efforts.
Happy to do it. Happy to do it. Appreciate your time, and please follow up with any questions or if I can provide any more information.
Great. We're going to, as you said, have staff send out those slides for the information. So thanks, Bill.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your evening.
Thanks. All right, moving on. Neil's already making his way to the podium for the 2055 Metropolitan Transportation Plan update. I know you all have been anxiously ready for the next update. So we're getting, are we on the home stretch for this, Neil? How we doing?
I'd say we're a little more than halfway, but the most important parts are coming up this summer. So
Right.
I was asked earlier if we're going to be in a position to cancel any additional meetings. Unfortunately, I think we're going to be meeting through the summer. If we're lucky this year, I think we can cancel December. So yeah.
Wow, you really just took the air out of the room.
Sorry. If you had any vacation plans.
Yeah, anybody need an extra cookie, go ahead and run get one. Neil, Allison, go ahead.
Thank you. So yeah, we'll have a brief update on the schedule, but Allison will really focus in on what we've been doing with the roadway ranking process since we received projects from your member jurisdictions in January and February. And then the focus of phase 2 public engagement will be on this draft roadway project list that we've been working on over the past several months. And we'll close out with looking ahead. So a quick schedule as to where we're at. If you remember, we began the planning effort for the 2055 MTP last summer, and we've been updating the goals and objectives and working on other numerous tasks leading up to the roadway project submission and ranking process. The scenario planning helped inform the roadway project ranking process. That effort has wrapped up in the first quarter of this calendar year. This board approved the roadway revenue forecast at its February meeting, and that revenue forecast is going into the project ranking and development of that project list. The congestion management process, that is directly related to the congestion management education sessions that you all have heard about over the past several months, and parallel to the update of the 2055 MTP, we've been identifying congested corridors. So we will have an update for you on that over the next couple of meetings. The project evaluation, as I mentioned, Allison will get into more detail on that. And then we'll have our second phase of public involvement, hopefully beginning next month. And then a third phase later on this calendar year focused on the draft report. And then we will be working to prepare the 2055 MTP document, which is really the final deliverable that this board will adopt. We're going to start that this summer with adoption of the entire process for the 2055 MTP scheduled for March of 2026. So with that, I will turn it over to Allison for an update on the roadway project submission process.
All right, thank you so much, everybody. All right, so as Neil said, we are getting into some of the big ticket items in kind of our process. One of those is talking to y'all through this roadway project submission process and really what we've been very heavily involved with over the past couple of months. So as you know, our jurisdictions, we reached out to get projects submitted. We went through that process in January and on into February with that project submission window. You may recall we had an online process. We did a training, had some tools available for our jurisdictions. We really appreciated everybody's efforts to get those projects in. That moved us into pretty much immediately our project evaluation process. We have been working through that very consistently over the past couple of months, and we are now at the fiscal constraint portion of that exercise. So just want to kind of talk us through that a little bit more over the next few slides here. So you can see when we talk about evaluation, we have a couple of tiers, tier 1 and tier 2. We started that in March with kind of our quantitative tier 1 evaluation. That's our first cut at scores. And then we established a cutoff for a subset of those projects to progress into tier 2. We evaluated those going into April and finishing up into May. That's both a quantitative and qualitative process. So we'll talk about it a little bit more in a moment, but we have our roadway ranking review committee that was very heavily involved in that process, and we greatly appreciated their help. Once we had the evaluation of those projects fully completed, we were able to combine the tier 1 and tier 2 scores, put those up against our available roadway revenues, which we had brought to you all earlier in the year, and then look at the application of fiscal constraint. This is something that we were undertaking earlier today with our R3C committee. And then once we have all of this put together, as Neil mentioned, we are going to be talking to members of the public in the summer. And the focus of that will be in our draft fiscally constrained project list. This is also the opportunity over the summer to present this to the TCC and the board and ultimately recommend that draft project list be released for public comment. So talking a little bit more about our roadway project submissions. When we think about the candidate projects that were received, we had over 200 projects that were received. We have those sorted out here by the STI categories that those projects qualify for. And that's very important to us because obviously when we think about those, that's also the funding pot that we would be corresponding with. And so we kind of think about everything into those expected STI categories. I'm sure you all are generally pretty familiar with this. We talked about this as we went through our revenues, but just to kind of reorient all of us, so statewide projects are going to be more at the interstate level. When we get into our regional projects, you can expect to see those US and major NC highways, and our division level projects are pretty much everything else. So I mentioned that we have a two-tiered prioritization process. This is consistent with how we've prioritized projects in the past, and I know we've brought this to you in previous meetings. Our tier 1 and tier 2 criteria We're starting with that quantitative process in Tier 1 that really focuses on congestion, safety, and accessibility to employment, and then moving into Tier 2 with a blend of qualitative and quantitative things. I think the thing I would want to point out to y'all on this slide is that as these were being developed and then vetted with our committees this time around, is we always do look back at what is included within the STI prioritization criteria at the statewide level to be sure that we're corresponding to what's being shown there as well. So ultimately, we know that while these are regional priorities, we also need to be responsive and competitive for what's happening when we move into some of that state scoring exercise. So our process to date, I mentioned that we do have a roadway ranking review committee, which we've been calling the R3C. We established that committee. Using that committee, we were able to go through our project submissions. We actually reconciled those, kind of helped to clean those up a little bit. Then working with the committee, conducted our Tier 1 evaluation, identified a cutoff point where we essentially took a subset of those projects forward, evaluated those in our Tier 2 criteria, and then estimated costs for the entirety of our 216 roadway projects that were submitted. The R3C purpose and need. We established this committee to really allow us the opportunity to look for consistency and efficiency in our project scoring. The opportunity to have this committee literally go through every single one of these projects with us and dig into understanding what we're seeing, how we're assessing these, consistent application of the more qualitative prioritization criteria, incredibly important for us when we think about consistency. The quantitative process oversight, there are some of our criteria that are more quantitative. We're pulling information from our travel demand model, from various other sources. But we had a lot of great discussions with our committee to understand how that was being done and make sure that everybody was comfortable with how that was being applied. And then finally, we did have broad geographic representation with our member jurisdictions, so we were able to start to dig in on some project-specific questions as well. And you can see that we had a blend of jurisdictional representatives from across the 3 counties and across our study area. We also had representation specific to the Metrolina regional model with Martin Kinneman, who was able to answer many of the technical questions that came up during our process. We had representation from NCDOT, which was very helpful as we continue to vet and refine some of our cost estimations throughout this point. We also even had some additional offline conversations with NCDOT just to make sure that we were hitting the mark and really feeling comfortable with the cost estimates that were developed throughout this process. The R3C meeting schedule, we began in mid-March with the review of those project submissions, and you can see we progressed throughout March with Tier 1 scores. April and into May, we had a very intensive Tier 2 scoring process. Again, this was where we went through every single one of those projects, project by project, looked at some of those individual criteria. And then earlier today, we worked with that committee to develop our very draft fiscally constrained projects list. So you all have seen this graphic before, but I think it does bear mentioning that where we're headed with all of this is we've already established our financial projections. Those were adopted by this body earlier this year. We received our roadway project submissions. We have now scored those project submissions through the work of the R3C. And we have actually today taken that first look at comparing that prioritized project list to the roadway financial projections and developing that fiscally constrained list. So we are very much through this process at this point, and we have the opportunity to then bring this to our advisory committee tomorrow. We're going to be talking with them further, and then ultimately we'll be bringing that to the TCC and back to the board and ultimately on to the public in the summertime. So just a preview of coming attractions next month. I also wanted to give you a preview of our phase 2 public engagement. We mentioned that that was forthcoming. We do have 3 engagement phases for the MTP. We've already conducted our first phase. That was our project kickoff, where we also talked about transportation needs. That was in the summer of last year. Now we're into our draft recommendations feedback, and then we will have a final phase near the conclusion of this year where we're looking more at the plan review specifically. So a little bit more details on what we're doing in this phase. We do want to provide that feedback loop to highlight some of what we heard in our first phase of engagement, showcase some of the project process and efforts to date, and then make sure that we're informing how the fiscally constrained project list was identified. We have had some great discussions already with some of our committee members, as well as staff, to start brainstorming activities and opportunities for phase 2. We expect this to be a blend of digital engagement, including interactive mapping and digital surveys. We are going to be bringing back our equity focus groups. Some of you all may remember that we had some equity focus group interaction in our first phase. We intend to bring those same groups back and have continued discussion with them. And then we also envision participating in a series of pop-up events. We did talk with members of the TCC as well as our other project committees about jurisdictional events that are ongoing during the time of our public engagement period, and we got some great feedback from that as well. So we have a robust list of some engagement activities that are happening during June 19th through July 19th of this year. So this is our target public comment period for phase 2 of engagement. So with that, I'm going to turn this back to Neil to bring us home.
Thanks, Allison. And just quickly to reiterate, where we're going with this. Obviously, we developed the draft fiscally constrained project list in our 6th meeting of our roadway ranking committee today. We are bringing that list for review of the advisory committee, which is a larger committee, tomorrow. And we will be bringing the draft fiscally constrained roadway project list to the TCC and the board with the request that the board open a public comment period on that draft list at your meeting next month. If the board approves that next month, we would start the public comment period the next day. That would be June 19th. We'd run that for 30 days until July 19th. I mentioned earlier the congestion management process. We also will be bringing the congested corridors map to the board for their information. And following that, we'll be working with your TCC members to identify strategies. Some of the strategies were articulated within the education session this evening. Strategies including capacity adding, but also some of these more programmatic strategies like signal retiming and other techniques to relieve congestion. I know that's been a rather long update tonight, but just wanted to bring the board up to speed on what we've been working on over the past couple of months. Happy to take any questions that you have.
Questions for Neil or Allison? It's a lot of work, so it's going to be a lot to digest at the next meeting, right?
Yes.
Super. All right. Well, we will look forward to being able to open up that public comment after our next meeting. Moving on to our next plan, the draft 2026-2035 TIP, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the NCDOT Prioritization 8.0 draft schedule. Travis.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Travis Johnson. I actually have 2 presentations back to back. The first one is going to go over why we don't get to take any more breaks this summer or fall, because it's going to go over just some of the key elements that are going to happen for these 3 key plans. The 2026-2035 TIP, which also incorporates amendments to the 2050 MTP and air quality conformity determination. We're also going to talk about some of the key events, which Neil just talked about for the 2055 MTP. And we're also starting to kick off the process for prioritization 8.0, which I have a separate presentation for after this one. So if you have specific 8.0 questions, I might answer it in the follow-up presentation. But the goal here is just to walk through the months just so we can see what will be going on, because we're sure there might be some confusion sometimes when we release this information, because there's a chance you could have a project on all 3 of these lists. And so we're going to try our best to work through that by finding these feedback we receive, trying to make sure that comments don't get lost in a different comment period. And we actually updated this presentation this morning after getting support from NCDOT to delay one of the approvals to help separate the comment periods a little bit more. So here we are in May. There's no action for the TIP/STIP. The roadway ranking process is moving forward as Neil discussed, and then there's been no action for prioritization 8.0, but we are working to refine our project list and working with the member jurisdictions and the transit agencies, airports to update the project list for submittal. In June, again, no action for the TIP and STIP. But the MTP will be coming back looking to opening that public comment period on the fiscally constrained project list. And we'll also be finalizing our prioritization 8.0 project list in preparation for the following month. In July, we'll be coming to ask for, or we'll still be in the public comment period for the MTP, but we'll also be coming to open a public comment period for the draft prioritization 8.0 project list, and these will incorporate all modes. In August, we'll be returning to ask for the opening of a public comment period for the 2026-2035 STIP MTP amendments and air quality conformity starting in August, going till September. And we'll also be asking you to adopt the fiscally constrained project list in August for the 2055 MTP. And we're also going to be asking you to recommend the project list for prioritization 8.0 for all modes. In September, we'll review the public comments we have received to that point, knowing the public comment period will still be going on. There'll be no action for the 2055 MTP. And then for prioritization 8.0, that is the deadline we have till the end of that month to submit all of our projects into the Spot Online database, which then completes the phase 1 of the prioritization process. And then we'll be coming back in October, and this was the date that we've requested to delay approval of for the draft TIP. So we'll come back for then approval of the draft TIP, the 2055 or 2050 MTP amendments, and the air quality conformity determination, and there'll be no action for the MTP or prioritization at that point. So just looking at that visually for the draft TIP, things picking up in August for action, public comment period, and then approval. For the 2055 MTP, as shared by Neil earlier, coming back in June for opening the public comment period, and then moving forward with the adoption of the fiscally constrained project list. And then for the prioritization 8.0, getting those draft lists together and then making sure that we have enough time to submit all of our projects online for the database in order to keep moving forward with the prioritization process. And so that's kind of the overlap. Originally, we were starting with this presentation. We had all the action items all in August, which created a lot of concern for us. And when we shared with the TCC, so that's why we've been working to try and delay some of the comment periods so they weren't overlapping as much. And so we're still going to work very hard to ensure that comments do not get lost if they show up for one comment period, but they apply to all comment periods. But with a lot of these steps, we're tied into deadlines that we have little control over. And so we're just trying to do the best we can. And as we shared, the MTP will continue on into 2026, working towards the draft document. And the draft schedule for P8 is out, and we're working towards an approval of that draft list, then going through data review and local input points. And then we're receiving the draft 2028-2037 STIP in 2027. And then you're going to have that other presentation to go more in depth on what goes into a prioritization process. So with that, I can answer any questions about the scheduling.
Questions? There's a lot. Sounds like it's going to be a busy summer, like you said. All right. Proceed forward.
So I'm going to give you an update on the 2028-2037 TIP development process, which is referred to as prioritization 8.0. Remind everyone what the NCDOT prioritization process is. We'll talk about the inventory of projects and how that gets created. We'll briefly touch on the local input point process, and then discuss the schedule and CRTPO milestones for prioritization 8.0. Again, this process is starting this year in 2025 and is going to go until 2027. So prioritization is a quantitative process used to select and fund transportation projects conducted by NCDOT. Most of the funding for transportation projects in North Carolina come from state or federal sources. And the main output of this is that 10-year spending plan called the Statewide Transportation Improvement Program. And that guides where our funding is going to go during those horizon years. So this will be what NCDOT is going to spend its money on from 2028 to 2037. So CRTPO is involved because we submit potential projects to the Strategic Prioritization Office for evaluation. And those projects are sorted into 3 separate categories: statewide mobility, regional impact, and division needs. And we'll get more into what that means later in the presentation. And so public engagement is integral throughout this entire process. So in order for a project to get into our CTP and start this process, there's a public engagement that you engage at the local level. Again, these are your projects that we are guiding through this process. Then the projects are added typically for highway to the MTP, for the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, which has its own public engagement process, which we were just talking about. As we create our project submittal lists, that will have a public engagement process. For each of the local input point allocations for regional or division needs, there's a public input process. And then the final draft tip and STIP will have a final public input process. So the public is involved a lot through the creation of this plan. So for projects, so one thing that is changing for the next prioritization cycle is a recommendation from the work group that's in meetings to reduce our overall project submittals for each mode to 34. And this recommendation was made to make the project submittal list align more with what we are actually seeing committed in the delivery portion, or for the portion of the STIP, for the amount of projects we're actually moving forward with. And so this will apply to all modes. And so we apply for highway, bicycle, pedestrian, rail, transit, and aviation. The final category being ferry, which we don't have in our region. Projects submitted for 8.0 will fit into one of three categories. So they're either a carryover, a holding tank, or a new project. So carryover projects are automatically evaluated in the next prioritization cycle. They're either in the current STIP but not scheduled for delivery, and delivery means the first 5 years of that plan. They're completed and active, or they're completed, or there is an active environmental document as part of that document, so that gets automatically, project would get automatically reevaluated. Or it's a part of a portion of a program project. So these are typically when you see a project get subdivided. So if your project was a U5730, now it's a 5730A, B, C. Those are then portions of that same project. So those get included as a carryover project that don't count towards our overall submittal allotment. So they will get automatically submitted each time. Holding tank projects were submitted in previous cycles, but they were either not selected or they don't qualify as a carryover project. These projects can be evaluated in prioritization 8.0. We can choose to not resubmit them. But for the projects we submit here, they will count against that overall submittal limit of 35 projects. So for new projects, they account for the submittal limit, and these are typically for highway selected as new projects based upon the MTP horizon year and score in that document. So if a project is not an MTP, then as a CRTPO, we typically would not submit it. And then for non-highway projects, it requires that we request that are made by our member organizations, and they need to be in an approved plan or document from them. It's important to note we're still working through the early stages of prioritization, and we're still not seeing the complete draft list of holding tank projects. However, looking at prioritization 7.0 and knowing that we have 34 submittal slots during prioritization 7.0, we had 47 holding tank projects. So it's looking highly unlikely we will have new highway projects available to submit unless there's a decision to significantly reduce the holding tank projects or something else happens. We will be able to accept new non-highway projects though. Typically we undersubmit those. However, that is typically only 10% of the overall funding that is made available is for the non-highway projects, and 90% is for the highway projects. So we combine the carryover, the holding tank projects, and if we have new projects, all get together, and then that creates the prioritization 8.0 database, and that is the list of projects that gets ranked and reviewed. Those projects are then separated into 3 separate types. That's either statewide mobility, and so these are typically, think of like interstates, the larger projects. Regional impact, which are North Carolina or US routes, and the division needs, which is the everything else, the smaller roadway projects that are still on the federal aid system. For those project tiers, 40% of the funding goes to statewide, and these projects compete across the entire state. So when we submit a project, we're competing against Raleigh, Wilmington, and Asheville. For regional impact, 30% of the funds are set aside for each of the regions. And again, we have 2 regions in the CRTPO area. We have Region E, which incorporates Mecklenburg and Union County, and Region F, which incorporates Iredell County. The important thing to note here is these funds are distributed to the regions based upon their overall population. So it's not equal among the 2 regions for the CRTPO. And then for the division needs, 30% of the funds are separated for each division. And we have 2 divisions, Division 12 and Division 10, with Mecklenburg Union being in Division 10 and Iredell being in Division 12. These projects are ranked based upon safety, congestion, travel time benefits, a lot of the same conditions that you see in the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. That's part of the reason why there's a unification of a lot of those goals in order to make sure that the projects we submit will rank highly through prioritization process. The weighting varies depending upon their tier. and they're set by NCDOT. Some of the largest changes to the weighting comes from the local input points process. So again, for statewide mobility projects is a purely quantitative process, and we don't have the ability to add local input points to show priority for those projects. For regional impact and division needs, we have the ability to affect 30% of the overall score for regional impact or 50% of the total score for division needs projects based upon applying local input points at the CRTPO or the NCDOT division level. So we as the CRTPO receive points that we can distribute, and the division receives a limited number of points they can distribute as well, and then that affects the overall final score. Talking about local input points, they're allocated based upon the population. So because we are a larger MPO, we receive a lot of local input points compared to some of our neighbors. And statewide projects are not eligible for those local input points. For regional impact and division needs, we typically receive 2,500 total points. However, there is discussion for prioritization 8.0 that number might change. So once we know more information on that, we will share an update with you. But we're working with the idea that we will still have the same number of point distribution. Historically, we've distributed this 2,500 points, 85% going towards highway funding projects. So that's 2,125 points, and then 50% for non-highway projects, and then doing 80% for highway projects for division needs projects, and then 20% for non-highway projects, which then splits up the points as in front of you. Local input point methodology. So the legislation requires MPOs to use a methodology that's qualitative, quantitative, and it provides a modal allocation. Local input points allocation assignment can be adjusted based upon the result of public input, and they can vary based upon or adjustments that vary from the methodology must provide a justification. So public input would be an approvable justification. We can also apply no more than 100 local input points to a project. So for the methodology rules, typically we've set the standard that the projects must have a reasonable chance of being funded. Again, the 100 local points to project. Points from division needs tiers should not be applied to statewide mobility projects. And then coordination with the division to achieve mutual point assignment. So for regional impact and division needs projects, because it makes up 30% or 50% of that total score, if we are strategic with those local input points and assign them to where also NCDOT assigns the points, that then increases that project's overall point value. And so that increases the likelihood of that project receiving funded, which is why it's important for us to coordinate with our division partners. As the board, you're going to be endorsing all the allocation of local input points based upon the adopted methodology. You'll be opening the public comment periods for these project lists, and then you can divert from recommended lists based upon public comment. But adjustments vary and again must require justification. So looking at the schedule moving forward, this is the draft schedule. Again, we shared breaking it off from the work group meeting, collection of projects, going to the draft review. So if you think about it's kind of confusing to look at it this way, but if you think about this in phases, it's kind of broken up into 3 separate phases. First phase is the project submittal, which is the phase we're in now. So we're reviewing, again, those previously submitted projects, identifying new projects if we have that availability, and then starting public engagement. Again, the action you're going to be asked to do is then to endorse this list and open the public comment period, and then we'll submit those project scores to Spot Online. And then phase 2 is the data review and scoring, and this is also when we apply the local input points. Again, your action will be to open to public comment periods, endorse local input points, and once we submit those projects, it's phase 3, which is when we receive that draft tip and stip. And that's when we start review of the project list to make sure information is still accurate, make sure that all the projects on the list are still desired by the communities. That's also when we identify if there is changes from the Metropolitan's transportation plan's identified horizon year, which will require amendments or descriptions if a project gets broken down into sub-projects or separate categories. And then we need to do air quality conformity at that time. Again, there's that public engagement with the draft tip and stip. And then as a board, we'll be asking you to open those comment lists and then approving of the tip project list. So for example, for prioritization 7.0, we are in this phase 3 for prioritization. But for prioritization 8.0, we're back in phase 1 because this is a cycle and it keeps rolling over each other. So as we start phase 3 for prioritization 8.0, we will probably be starting phase 1 of 9.0. And so every cycle, we add 2 years to that process, and the end of the last 2 years are typically where projects get added. So looking ahead, we're going to finalize that project list in June. We're going to come back in July with a draft project list and open for a public comment period. We'll then be asking you to endorse that project list in August, and then we will submit all projects by the end of the month. Going into October, we will start the data review process, and applying local input points will then conclude in December of 2026. And then around March of 2027 is when we're anticipating the draft 2028-2037 STIP and TIP to be released. And then we'll go through that engagement process similar to P7. So with that, I can answer any questions about prioritization 8.0.
Questions, Brad?
The only asterisk, Travis, was the potential change in local input points. What's driving that? And might they be moving in one direction or another? And does it matter?
So it'll probably move in the direction of the project submittals, and that's to reduce the overall number. And again, that's just, we are submitting more projects than we are receiving. And so there's a desire to just reduce that overall project list to make it align more with a reasonable expectation of projects to be funded. And so instead of submitting, 500 projects and receiving 10, it's just reducing that overall number of projects to where it's still a good collection of local needs, but it's more in line with what we're actually seeing funded. Yeah. And so that number should or could come down. It's expected to come down. I don't know what that number is as of right now.
Other questions? Councilmember Driggs?
Thank you for that. So when you create a constrained list, you're obviously making assumptions about available funds, right?
Yep.
And it would be helpful to me to know what those are. Like, this is a process, and I'm thinking, well, what can we expect? What sort of availability are we expecting, and which projects are likely to actually make it, because we've seen a lot of disappointments.
Right.
So is it possible to kind of, not right now, but I'm just saying, is it possible to give us a better indication of what capacity we think there will be, or realistically what projects are likely to get done?
Right. As a great point, I completely agree. It'd be great to have those numbers. We have requested that information, but it has not been shared with us. I do not know if we will receive that information prior to the submittal phase. We don't manage that funding element. It's run by the NCDOT Strategic Prioritization Office. I continually request that information, and I will continue to do so.
So you get that from the state?
Yep.
Right. Okay, thank you.
You talked about the projects are put into buckets of carryover holding tank and new project. Is that consistent on what every MPO across the state is doing, or is that just our?
Yeah, so again, they meet those caliber, and then throughout the state, that's what we are all doing, is looking at what counts as those separate categories. Our overall allotment is different from what other MPOs receive. And then, of course, the number of projects that count as carryover versus holding tank will vary greatly depending upon how many subsections you. So for example, we have a good chunk of U2509 as a carryover project, because that project was broken into many subsections. So like that's an example of where we will have a lot more carryover because of a project like that.
And then the carryover projects, or even the holding tank, are the cost estimates updated? I mean,
Yes.
some of those things have been around a while.
Right. Yeah. So every prioritization cycle, they receive updates. So this has been updated through the P7 process. And then when it starts over again, they'll be updated again.
Right.
Yep.
Hearing no other questions, we'll move on. Thank you. for
Thank
that.
you.
The last real agenda item that we have, and hopefully will be fairly quick, but we'll see. Mujib is going to bring, if some of you will remember that we updated the board bylaws, and as we were looking at those, there were some text that needed to kind of just be brought up with current times, so to speak. So this is hopefully our last revision and that we need to talk about. So Mujib, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And yes, I'm of course the last substantive item, so I intend to be brief, which is something that lawyers usually when they say don't mean, but I do mean this time. So, whoops, darn it. That's, yeah, it's because I clicked.
Yep.
There we go. All right, so let's just quickly talk about the bylaws revisions. The big key is that the idea was this would align with the memorandum of understanding changes you made last year. And so basically, the Article 1 revision is to align the bylaws with the reference in the MOU to the policy board throughout, and to clarify that that is the NPO entity that is the decision-making body. Then, of course, one of the things we did with Article 2 is we really cut it way down. We recognized that it was better to delete the former purpose and goals and say the purpose and goals of what you do are stated in the July 2024 MOU, which then allowed us to remove Article 3, because Article 3 spelled out roles and responsibilities, and we, of course, recognize that that's already in the MOU, so why repeat it there again? So that means that everything that follows, for example, if it's Article 4, it's now Article 3. If it's Article 5, it's now Article 4. So that's why you see that. The key is the first major change in Article 4, which is now Article 3. It really just corrects names. The Union County Land Use Board, and it adds our friends of the Turnpike Authority in there. Removal law is clarified. That's the removal of members. And it's just noting, it says, it really adds one word, applicable law, so that there's no confusion. Then the changes to Article 5, and which is now new Article 4, Section 4, removes references to subcommittees. And there's a reason it does that. To be blunt, I'm driven a little crazy by when I see a subcommittee, but you don't have it as a committee. In other words, you say, hey, the board is going to create a subcommittee. Well, did you create a committee first? So the idea is that it gets back to have a committee, and then if you need a subcommittee, you can still do that as well. So that's just one of those simple things of it makes more sense, and it allows you to do that. So nothing really other than a lawyer basically dealing with a pet peeve of his. And then the final sets of changes are that it clarifies that the chair or the vice chair, in the chair's absence, only the vice chair can do this, can create those committees. There's also one other thing that we came up with. Staff had noted that I believe the Gaston Lincoln MPO allowed the chair to approve minor budget changes to your unified planning work program, as long as there's a 5% or less, and as long as they don't affect the scope of the UPWP. So we put that in. It's pretty straightforward. It's something you see normally, and because it's limited to just 5%, it gets reported back to you before the end of the fiscal year. Hopefully sooner rather than later, but we didn't want to say has to be reported in 30 days or 60 days, because sometimes you're going to cancel meetings. Now, one of the next things we do is dealing with the issue of remote meetings, or meetings that are not necessarily in person. We clarify that the preferred method of meeting for the board is in person. But it does clarify when remote meetings can be declared by the chair, and that quorum and voting is calculated the same as if the meeting's in person. And how we do that typically is if you have adverse weather events, if you have a state of emergency declared by the state, and then a presidential state of emergency, or we have sort of a take-all provision of there are going to be times when it's appropriate that none of those matter. And that's perhaps you've got an alien invasion. That's just a running joke. But the idea is that you want to have something in there that says there is always a catch-all that allows you to do that if needed. The last other change there, the change to Article 5, Article 6, Section 6 is now Article 5, Section 6, and just allows for the possibility of a change by our friends in Raleigh related to MPO voting. We're not aware that that's anticipated to happen, but we're just leaving that in there if for some reason the General Assembly decides to modify how voting happens. And then what we also did is, because we noticed that the bylaws said that a change in the bylaws only had to be approved by 2/3 of the members with weighted voting, we changed it to 3/4 to make that consistent with the bylaws. That way, if you're going to make changes to the MOU, it then allows you to make changes to the bylaws using the same the same rule. Now, when I put the next thing, we thought, hey, maybe we'd even approve this today. The plan right now is to approve this if you don't have significant changes at the June meeting. So actually, it would be, if it's adopted in June, it would go into effect at the conclusion of the June meeting unless you decide otherwise. Any questions? And I hope that was brief.
I think you did a great job. Questions, comments?
Hi, Majid. Thank you.
No problem.
I did notice something as I was reviewing this. The terms of office as stated in the bylaws, it says the entity's chief elected official shall designate that member entity's representative, whereas the MOU says the voting members, it says the voting members of the policy board shall consist of the chief elected official. So the MOU says the voting member is the chief elected official, whereas the bylaws are saying the elected official designates. Now, obviously, the elected official could designate themselves, but there's a disparity between the two. And if you're harmonizing, that's just something I noticed we might want to harmonize.
We'll take a look at that. That was one that just managed to slip by. We
No worries.
apologize for that. What
It's a
what
long
we would
document.
note is that it does allow the chief elected official to also designate alternates. We think that's important.
Exactly.
And it's not just one alternate, but potentially multiple, as there are some cases where, members have more than one vote, 2, 3, depending on population. So we'll make sure we fix that before the June meeting.
Yeah, just
Thank you for calling that to our attention.
Thank you, Majid.
Great job. Other questions? Comments? Right, so short of that one update, would everybody be okay if we put this on the consent next month to produce another item to be presented? Or we can certainly ask Majib to come back in June to present again. So, and anybody, any opposition to this being on consent next month?
No.
Okay, all right, so
Sounds good. We'll make sure staff gets the corrected version, and then you'll have that for the June meeting by consent.
yeah, so we'll get that as quickly as you get that over to us, so everybody has plenty of time to look at that. And if for some reason there's any more discussion that needs to be on there, we can always pull it off of consent if we need to. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, we're on the home stretch, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there. Neil, any updated agenda items?
The June 18th CRTPO Board agenda is anticipated to include the action item to open a public comment period on the draft fiscally constrained roadway project list that you heard about with the 2055 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Another action item, which we just heard about, is the update to the CRTPO Board bylaws with the change that was identified by Mayor Murray. We'll have information reports on the CATS Coordinated Service Plan. We might have an information report on the 2026-2035 draft tip, and then we'll have our final update on the I-77 South work corridor working group recommendations. And then just one upcoming issue, we will have a Beyond 77 Executive Committee meeting on May 27th, and several board members are members of that executive committee. So just a heads up about that. And that's all I have, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. Tony, I didn't give you a heads up, but do you have anything that you would like to offer from the DOT board, since we were giving a little grace to Division 10 and 12 for a break?
We have 4 new board members. We meet on the road in Asheville first week of June to look at all the hurricane projects. And we're working on the money side of that. And now also the 8 big projects have been stood up in the mountains. And so those are starting to move along. And, a lot going on. That's about it.
Great. Thank you for that. Any questions, comments? Sure, go right ahead.
Not for Tony. I just have a
Sure,
comment.
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
I'd just like to recognize Matthew's town manager, Becky Hawk, who's leaving our employment, unfortunately, to go to Wilmington and become their town manager on June 12th. She was our assistant town manager for 5 years and our town manager for 3 years. And she's done an outstanding job and has been involved in many of our transportation conversations as well as everything else that goes on in Matthews. So I want to wish her luck. And if any of you that are listening that work for these guys that are town managers that want a job, if you could shoot me an email, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Good luck
Don't
in
give
your
a job
town manager
posting here at the
search.
end.
Good luck in your town manager search. It's been a real party for the town of Waxhaw.
Yeah. Is a tough thing. So, all right. Well, if no other comments or questions, we'll stand adjourned and we'll see everybody on June 18th.